Hello everybody, my name is Brandon. Welcome back to Cinefessions, where we talk all things media. So this is part 2, finally, of my 2021 retrospective series, where I'm taking a look back at all of the media that I consumed in the previous year, and I'm talking about some of my favorites. So today we are going to look at my top 10 book discoveries of last year. So just like in my film discoveries video, these can be books that have been released in any year. It doesn't matter what year they were released. It only matters that I read them for the first time last year. So that's what I always like to do. I've done that for, like almost 10 years now, I guess, ever since we started on the website. That's just how I've always treated these like year of things, because to me, that's what's most important, is that I'm consuming it for the first time that year. And I don't read enough 2021 releases to have a top 10 of 2021. I don't necessarily watch enough 2021 movies. Like, I don't typically watch new or read new. I tend to look back when I'm consuming media, and so that's why I tend to go this route with things. But let me also say, so the year doesn't matter, the release year doesn't matter, but it also doesn't matter what type of reading material it is. So this is going to be all like standard, typical books, but it will also contain some graphic novels and or some manga. So I basically just looked at all of the reading I did, and it doesn't matter what format I read it in, ebook, audiobook, physical, doesn't matter. It was all applicable to this list, or it all qualified for this list. So we'll be looking at all three types of media as I count down my top 10. Before we get to the top 10, though, I don't have any honorable mentions, but I do want to talk some stats, just because I'm a huge nerd and I love making Excel sheets and graphs in Excel. So that's what we're going to do. I say Excel, but it's Google Sheets because it's just much better. And so we are going to look at those first. So before we get into that, though, if you guys do enjoy this video, please take a second, hit that like button down there. That really does help me out. But with all of that out of the way, guys, let's not waste any more time at all. Let's dive right in to my top 10 book discoveries of 2021. Like I said, I do want to start with some statistics, so I will timestamp this out. So if you don't care about stats, you can easily skip this, but I know there's at least one other person out there that would care to see this information. So I have it all on my phone here, and so I will not go over all of the stats that I've kept, because I keep a silly amount. Some of them you just won't care about. So I'm going to try to put up on the screen here some graphs of things that I think are the most interesting of my statistics from last year, and a lot of them I'm actually comparing last year to 2020, because that's really when I started keeping these statistics. So as I mentioned, I will be talking books, manga, and graphic novels, and I've broken it down here. So I ended up reading 59 standard or traditional books, and then 13 graphic novels, which kind of blew my mind that number was so low. But then I read 33 volumes of manga. So I think that's why my graphic novel number was so low, because I discovered manga for the first time last year and I fell in love with it. Like, manga is an amazing art form. It is such a wonderful form of storytelling that I am just hooked. And I'm so glad I decided kind of randomly on a whim to take the plunge into manga, because it really worked out for me. So 33 manga. So that's a pretty good portion here. It looks like it is 31.4% of my total reading was manga, 12.4 in graphic novel, and then 56.2 were traditional books. So that's a pretty good mix of styles of book. The other thing I find interesting is the intended audience for the books that I'm reading, because I love middle grade, so I read a ton of middle grade. I don't read a whole lot of YA, and of course I read a ton of adult as well. And so I'm always curious, like, where those numbers lie here. So it looks like 13.3% of my reading last year was middle grade, and then 6.7% was young adult, while 80% was adult books. So that's awesome, because that means, like, I didn't pad my numbers, which, like, who cares? I don't care about how many numbers, the number of books I read. Like, I don't really care. I'll admit I was trying to break 100 this year, because I was so close last year. I think, well, we'll look at that in a few minutes, but I was very close last year, but didn't quite make it. And so I was actively trying to reach 100 books this year, and I'm very happy that I did. I ended up reading 105. Now, there was a bunch of manga in there, as we talked about, and so those are a little bit quicker to get through. You can see there was how many middle grade? 14 middle grade. So those, of course, are easier to get through, and then 7 young adult, but 84 of those were still adult. So that's pretty awesome. I'm very happy about that. let's look at the first 2020 versus 2021 chart I have here. And this is dealing with the genre of the book. And so obviously there are, books can be multiple genres, and a lot of them are multiple genres. But what I try to do is kind of pick what I felt was the main genre of the book. And so you can see on your screen, like, I was shocked. Last year, I actually ended up reading 34 sci-fi versus only 27 horror. And that blew me away. Like, I was so surprised by the end of the year that I'd read more sci-fi than horror, because I always consider myself a horror-first guy. But last year, it was a little different in the book world. This year, though, I corrected that ship. Not intentionally, it just happened, where I read 37 horror and only 23 sci-fi. Those, of course, I'm talking about those because those are the two genres that I read the most. So the third most genre I read in 2021 was the same as 2020, fantasy. They happen to be number 3 both years. But then in 21, I ended up reading crime as my, what would that be? My 4th most. And then action and true crime were tied with 5 books each for my 5th and 6th most read genre. And then you can see all the other genres tossed in there. I didn't read any autobiographies this year, where I read 1 last year. Same with mystery and humor. None this year. Read some last year. So you can just see the differences there between 2020 and 2021 when it comes to my genre reading. So let's take a look at the formats that I've consumed these books in. And you can see, audiobooks is and probably forever will be my most read format, because I love audiobooks. I guess I finished 1 more audiobook in 21 versus 20. And then digital graphic novels. Somehow I read 1 more in 2020 versus 2021 when I actually signed up for Marvel Unlimited in 2021. So I just didn't use it, or haven't used it enough yet, as much as I was expecting, I guess I'll say. And then ebook, I only read 1 last year, 1 in 2020. I've actually read 2 this year already, and I'm on my 3rd one, which is, I'm loving it. It's the start of the Darth Bane trilogy, and it's fantastic. So thanks to my wife getting me the Kindle Paperwhite, ebooks will likely be on the rise for 2022. And then you can see my physical books. I read 44 in 2020, where I read 53 physical books in 2021. And so I love that, because if I'm reading a physical book, chances are it's from my collection, my gigantic collection of books that I have unread. And so, making a dent in that pile is always a good thing in my book. So I will rate everything that I read. And then, of course, on Goodreads, you can only do 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 stars. Well, my system, I use half stars as well. And so it might be a little bit different here than what you see on Goodreads, but I try to mark it at the bottom of every one of my reviews what my actual legitimate rating is, with the half stars included. So if you ever want to see that, that should be at the bottom of all my Goodreads reviews. But my average rating for 2021 was actually 3.74 stars, which is up 0.23 versus 2020. So it was actually an improvement when it comes to reading, not only in terms of numbers read, but in terms of my ratings for the book. So that's cool too. So as you can see, I ended up reading 5 5-star books in 2021, which is the exact same number I read in 2020. 4.5 stars is pretty similar as well. But looking at the other end of this rating scale, that's where it gets interesting to me. I didn't even realize this as I was going through the year, but I read no 1-star or 1.5-star books in 2021. That's awesome. And so the lowest star rating I gave in 2021 was 2 stars, and I ended up scoring 5 books at 2 stars. So 5 5-star reads and 5 2-star reads for the low end and the high end of my 2021 rating scale. That's just a good year of reading. The last chart I'll talk about on here, so we can get to the top 10 list, is kind of just a breakdown of everything I thought was interesting or important. And so you can see 2021 versus 2020, and then how what that difference was between the 2 years. So you can see in 2020, I ended up completing 96 books. So I was 4 shy of hitting that 100 mark, which is why in 2021, I really pushed to get there, and I'm so glad I did, because I did 105 books last year, which of course is a difference of 9 books, which is awesome. I don't necessarily need to go over every single one of these because you guys can see them, but I will talk about a few of them. So you can see in 2021, I owned 64.76% of the books that I completed, which was down actually a little bit from 2020, down about 4%. So I would love to read more of what I own. That's always the goal, but obviously it was down a little bit it in 2021. I ended up reading almost 500 pages more in 21 versus 2020, so that's like a book or two, but you can see the difference was actually 9 books. And so if you go down to the average pages per book, you can see that my average pages of 2021 was only 244 versus 261. So it was about 17 pages less per book, which is, explains that page number difference there being so small when the number of books was so much larger. So my best reading month of 2020 was actually January, and then it kind of tapered off a little bit throughout the year. But last year it was March. And if you are a avid viewer of the channel, you might remember that March was when I posted my first manga reading vlog. And so that is how I ended up getting through 17 books, because most of them were manga that month. So it was just a huge number of books that I typically don't normally get that many or get through that many in a month. But I was, one, focused on completing that video, and two, just loving what I was reading. So I ended up reading a bunch. And then if you look at that chart, it actually goes down like throughout the rest of the year. But that's just how it goes. You get busier at the end of the year. It always happens. The last one I'll talk about is the median year of the books read. And so you can see in 2021, it was 2013. Yeah, 2013. Whereas in 2020, the average or the median year was actually 2001. So I was reading a lot more newer books in 2021 versus 2020. So I would love to see that number like go back a little bit again in 2022, but I'm not going to like actively attempt to do that. It just depends on what I end up reading. But I would love to read some more classics just because they're classics. Like there's a reason that they're classics. And so I just want to read more of those as time goes on here. But yeah, so those were all of my stats. Hopefully that was interesting to at least one other person, because I love stats. But with all of that done, now let's start talking about my 10 favorite book discoveries out of all 105 books that I read last year. So as I mentioned, there'll be no honorable mentions. We're just going to get into this one here. So coming in at number 10 is the first true crime book on this list. This is Black Dahlia, Red Rose, written by Pugh Marie Eatwell. So this one was just not only just an awesome book, but I'm so glad that I finally have read something about the Black Dahlia. So the Black Dahlia, as I've mentioned, I'm sure multiple times in the past, but this is like that case is why I learned about the existence of true crime. Back when I was in high school, I was at my friend's house, and her mom had on her end table a Black Dahlia book, and I think it was My Daddy Was the Black Dahlia Killer, which has since been essentially like debunked, if you will. Like it's kind of looked down on now because it's realized how unfactual it is, or how much fiction is in there. But anyway, it was on her table, and so I started picking up and looking through it, and I was like, man, what is this? And so that's what got me into it. Now, I say that, but I did remember reading parts of a book called Bully back when I was in middle school, I guess it was. But I didn't realize there was a whole genre around this. And so until I picked up that Black Dahlia book, and that's when I realized, man, there's like a whole section of this. There's a whole section of this in Barnes and Noble, in Borders, and, Walden Books when that was still a thing. And so because of that, I really got into the genre, and I started picking up some books, but I didn't read a ton of them, which is kind of, just how I am, I guess, as a person. But thanks to this new book journey here over the last however long it's been, 4 or 5 years, like I've been reading a ton of true crime, but I'd never gotten around to a Black Dahlia book. This one though just caught my eye one day when I was at Barnes and Noble, and I looked it up. There was an audiobook, and so I ended up adding it to my list of books that I wanted to read. So if you don't know, the Black Dahlia is the nickname given for a murder victim by the name of Elizabeth Smart. She was murdered in Hollywood in the 1930s, I believe it was. And they just have never, it's an unsolved mystery. And there are a bunch of suspects that you can go through. This book presents a really strong idea, or a really strong suspect, I guess. And it kind of just makes sense. I don't know that it's accurate or that it's the one, but it could be. And so it's just well written. It reads more like a noir thriller almost, as opposed to a true crime book. And I think that's to its benefit, because then more people who don't necessarily like the true crime genre, or just haven't spent time with the true crime genre, might feel a little bit more comfortable with it, because it lends itself to more of a narrative style. And so it's just really well done. I was gripped from start to end, which I'll probably say about every single one of these. So yeah, this is an awesome book. If you're new to the genre, this is a fascinating case with so many different suspects. So it's a great one to get into. And this book is an awesome starting point. So number 10 on my list from the true crime genre is Black Dahlia, Red Rose, written by Pugh Marie Eatwell. So I told myself that I need to make this video a little bit quicker than my top 10 film discoveries video, because I just start rambling on about these things because I loved them when I read them or when I watched them. And so I need to reel myself in and keep them a little bit quicker. But coming in at number 9, I have my Batman cup, which is very fortunate. But number 9 is going to be Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. So this is like one of the most legendary graphic novels ever written. I ended up reading Watchmen at the end of 2020, I guess it was. And so it was only right that I ended up reading The Dark Knight Returns in 2021, because like to me those are kind of like the two pillars of what you think of when you think classic graphic novels. And for my money, I ended up liking The Dark Knight Returns more than I liked Watchmen. Now, don't get me wrong, Watchmen is great, but for my money, you can't beat Batman, okay? So that's why this one ended up at number 9, and why Watchmen didn't even end up on my top 10 list of 2020. At least I don't think it did. I don't remember that it did anyway. But this one is, takes place in kind of like a future Gotham, and Bruce Wayne has retired, but he comes out of retirement, and just craziness ensues. So what is so great about this is that we get, all of our favorite hero, like Superman is in this. There's just so many characters here. Joker is here, and they are drawn so interestingly, so unlike anything I've seen them drawn as in the past. They're super blocky, and it works. Like, it shouldn't work as much as it does, but they do a really great job with it, and Miller's storytelling is excellent. The only knock I had against this one is I think I ended up reading this in April, and so it was right after all of the manga I was reading, and manga is super quick, super short. There's maybe one word or one bubble with dialogue in it on each panel. This one was just so long and so filled with words. It was just very long-winded, and the way they had it set up was so different than what I'm used to in a comic book. So that said, though, still the narrative I thought was fascinating. I loved these, just learning this aspect of these characters. And so, this was just so new to me. I'd actually started reading this book, man, I don't know, when I first got this graphic novel, so probably 10 to 12 years ago now. But I only read maybe the first 30 or so pages, not even that probably. And I just never went back to it. Not because I didn't like it, I just didn't go back to it for some reason. And so I'm so glad last year I ended up doing that, because this is just it's a classic for a reason. It is a penultimate Batman story for a reason. Frank Miller does this character so well. So cannot recommend this one enough either. So coming in at number 9, the first graphic novel on the list, and frankly, maybe the only graphic novel on the list. Either way, this one is The Dark Knight Returns, written by Frank Miller. Coming in at number 8 is going to be Alfred Hitchcock and the Making of Psycho, written by Stephen Rebello. So this is one I will keep super short, just because I do have a full book versus movie episode on this. The only book versus movie episode I ended up doing last year, where it's not really a book versus movie, it's a book and movie. So I'm just essentially comparing this book that I'm talking about now against Hitchcock, which is from 2012, I believe. The film, which is based on this book. And this is exactly what the title says it is. This is the account of the making of Psycho, and it starts right from the conception of the idea all the way through the filming, which was just fascinating, and then the aftermath of it, which I think I did this exact same thing in my book versus movie, because I was just watching that the other day. But anyway, this is a great book. If you are at all interested in Psycho or Alfred Hitchcock or film history in general, you should definitely check out this book. As someone who knew nothing about the behind the scenes of Psycho, frankly, this was fascinating from start to finish. I was just hooked on this. And I actually read a couple different film related books this year, which you may or may not see another one later on this list. And but this one really stood out, and it's made me want to dive more into this genre of books. So film history books even more, which is why I have one on my 22 for 22 list this year. And so this was just awesome. It is so detailed and filled with just interesting facts about, Hitchcock's struggle with making Psycho. Like he funded this himself because the studio said no. So he said, well, what if I fund it myself? And they're like, okay, go for it. Essentially laughing at him. Like, it's a very interesting story if you are a fan of the film and don't know much about it. If you are a film fanatic, you might know a bit more about it than I did, but either way, great book. I loved it, and check out my book versus movie episode on that if you want to know kind of more detailed thoughts on both the movie and the book itself. So number 8, Alfred Hitchcock and the Making of Psycho, written by Stephen Rebello. Number 7 on my list, I actually read thanks to Audible Plus, which if you are an Audible member, you probably know what this is. But if not, if you're a member, you actually have access to this Audible Plus library, which essentially are all these books that you can just read for free or as part of your subscription. You don't have to spend a credit on them. And there's a lot of really good books in there. I think I read, I don't know, 6 or 7 that way last year. It was a really cool addition to my membership. And so I love that. And this is one that I had seen the cover for it in so many different Audible sales because the cover it just grabbed my attention. But I never actually purchased it. And I'm glad I didn't because it ended up being on Audible Plus. And so this one is Fantastic Land, written by Mike Bachhoven. And this book is it's told in kind of a World War Z style, if you've read that one, where we are after the fact and we're basically, listening to or reading people's accounts of this incident that happened at this amusement park. So we are following this whole big group of people, but they were survivors of Fantastic Land, which is essentially like a Disneyland or a Universal Studios, but it's the number 3 one, in that same area. But a hurricane ended up coming and hitting the amusement park, and it trapped a bunch of people inside, and emergency help just couldn't get to them because of basically they were deemed low risk, essentially. And so they were rescues were spending their time elsewhere. Well, it turns out things kind of went crazy in Fantastic Land. It's almost like a Lord of the Flies type setting, but you're dealing with teenagers and some adults, mostly though, not teenage, I guess mostly college age students. And things get dark and gruesome, and they get that way fast. And so it's just I love this style where you're kind of looking back on what happened. The only thing that I don't like about that style is that we know that, who we're talking to or who's telling their story. We know that they survived, and so we know the end of their story at least, that aspect of it. But I just love the idea of this book, being trapped in this amusement park with hundreds of other, most of them were just co-workers, basically, and them forming these different tribes that end up forming, and it just basically being all out anarchy, and just the way they handle it, I thought was really interesting. It got super gory and bloody. There's assaults, murders. It's just absolute chaos in this park. And the way that the story is told it feels unique, even though it is very World War Z. It's very clear this is inspired by World War Z, but it feels unique in its own way, given its subject matter, I guess. So this one was great. It's not perfect. The main villain, I guess, or the main antagonist here, his story, he feels a little ham-fisted toward the end, but that's okay. I could forgive that because the build-up to that was so good, and I think the conclusion is good, but you're not there for the climax because you already know what happens. Clearly, you're reading these people's story, they're out alive, but how they get to that end is just really why you're reading it. And so this one was really cool. I'm so glad I finally read it because I really enjoyed it. So number 7 is, thanks to Audible Plus, Fantastic Land, written by Mike Bachhoven. All right, this video is already too long, and we're only at number 6. But number 6 is going to be Sea of Rust, written by Robert C. Cargill. So this book was just awesome. So we are dealing with essentially these robots. We are in a post-apocalyptic world where robots have taken over the humans. I don't remember if there were no humans or just very few humans, but I think we're at the point now where essentially all humans have been kind of extinguished by this robot uprising because they are smart robots that have taken over. And just the setting, it's almost like a Western setting. The Sea of Rust feels like this desert setting, and the characters like are just fantastic in this. You get just these really interesting robots that are trying to survive and doing questionable things in order to do that, because it's all out anarchy for them too, just like in the last one, but in a much different way. So the humans are gone, but the robots aren't like in a utopia by any stretch. They have to do what they need to do to survive. They need parts, they need things like that. And so things are just crazy. We are following like this main robot who is a scavenger essentially. And her story, its story, I thought was just so well done. And so this is one that if you like that, like not futuristic, almost like future Western, I guess. That's the best way I can describe this. If you like that idea and you're into that like AI taking over thing, like this is great. There's a lot of flashbacks to how they ended up taking over. This is one where it's like, this is the setting for an awesome universe that could be created here. And I know Cargill wrote another book that the cover looked very similar to this, but I don't know if it's a true sequel. It might just be another book set in the same world. I don't know. I need to look that up because I really do want to check that out at some point, because this one was great. So this book was just, I don't know, like I can't recommend this one enough if you like the sci-fi genre mixed with a little bit of that Western feel. It's not a Western, but it just has that feel to it. That's what I got from it as I was reading through this one. So I loved this, and I think not a lot of people talk about this one that I've heard. So definitely check it out if you're interested. So number 6 is Sea of Rust, written by Robert C. Cargill. Into the top 5 now, and number 5 is back to nonfiction and film. This is Chainsaw Confidential, written by Gunnar Hansen. This book was excellent. Like, I love Texas Chainsaw Massacre. What horror fan doesn't? I feel like people either love the original or they love the remake, but I don't know many people that don't like either of them. But anyway, this is written by Gunnar Hansen, who is, of course, the original Leatherface, and it goes through the entire filming of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And it is so interesting to read this one, as I've said probably 100 times today. But just learning about like the behind the scenes here, I thought was so cool, because it's another one where, as much as I love the movie, I didn't really know much about the behind the scenes on this one at all, but you get a lot of detail, and it's right from the actor's perspective. So from somebody's perspective who was there every day sweating and stinking in this Texas sun. So like, you don't get a better account than this. And I think the reason I put this one above the Alfred Hitchcock in The Making of Psycho is simply because of perspective. Like, you cannot replace firsthand experience with, secondhand accounts. And so that's why this one just topped the list in terms of like books I read about film last year. It is excellent. If you are a horror fan, if you're a fan of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you need to read this book. It is just filled with so many cool tidbits, and I'm so glad that I've read it. This is one, honestly, I could see myself reading this again in the future, because it is just really well written. It is super fast, super quickly paced as well. So it doesn't feel like you're reading nonfiction. It's awesome. So cannot recommend this one enough either. Great book if you like the nonfiction idea, or if you like the idea of reading nonfiction and books about film, check it out. Number 5, Chainsaw Confidential, written by Gunnar Hansen. My throat got real scratchy at the end of that one, so I apologize. But anyway, number 4 is going to be another classic. This is The Exorcist, written by William Peter Blatty. So everybody knows the film. Of course, I've seen the film probably more times than I can tell you at this point. I don't even know, but I love the movie. It is, a horror icon. But I'd always wanted to read this book, and I purchased this book at like a used bookstore. Man, I don't even know. Before I even really started collecting books, I just happened across it and purchased it there. Now, did I read the book I purchased? No, I ended up doing this on audiobook, but either way, it's now consumed, and that's what I care about. So this is exactly what you expect it to be. This is, the story of The Exorcist, and exactly what the movie was based off of. So the beats are very similar, and the story, of course, is going to go, where it's going to go, thanks to the film itself, if you've seen that. But we are dealing with, what is she, 12 years old, I believe, who is possessed, a 12-year-old girl who is possessed by a demon of some sort. At least that's what's believed. So This book, like, oh my gosh, like, talk about things that just do it better than the movie. And the reason it stood out to me so much, even though the movie is pretty, it goes as far as it can, but the book can go even further because you don't have to have a 12-year-old actress doing these crazy, awful things. And so it can go even further, and it takes advantage of that. It is disgusting. It's gross. Like, there are just so many scenes that's like, oh my God, like, this is a little girl that we're dealing with here. And the things that she has to go through are just, it's hard to sit through, hard to read. But that's what I love about it. Like, it's just so good. The only like negative, or not even a negative, but the only thing I thought was strange was that, like, the whole middle chunk of the book, like that whole aspect of it, which probably makes up like 2/3 of the book, was all about, is she possessed, or is she sick? Is she mentally ill? And they spend so much time with that. That's what the priest is trying to discover before he goes to his church to try to get an exorcism. They spend so much time building it up, and then something happens and they're like, boom, it's done. And he just goes. And it's like, whoa, that was kind of a whiplash a little bit. Like, literally, we spend 2/3 of the book building up to this point, and they wrap it up in like 2 sentences. And it's like, oh my gosh, okay, I guess we are now moving on to the third act here. So that part was a little jarring, but it's not terrible. It didn't take me out of it at all. It was just like, wow, that was quick. Like, what a quick wrap up for something that we've spent so much time building. But so that's the only real like negative thing I could say about this. I thought that the characterization was awesome. I just loved these characters even more. Like, I have so much more respect for the mother in this than I did in the movie, which I didn't disrespect her. That's not what I mean. I just mean, like, I appreciate her more. Thanks to having read the book now. So this is one where if you've seen the movie, the book arguably does it better. So definitely check out the book if you are interested in this film. So I loved this one and was so surprised by how much I liked this. I will mention the audiobook. I need to wrap this up, but I will mention the audiobook is mediocre, I guess I will say. It's done by Blatty, so it's very clear like he knows and loves these characters and the writing, but he's just hard to understand sometimes. And so I had to end up slowing this one down just so I could like understand what was being said. So that was the only like bad part about the audiobook. But aside from that, definitely read this book however you decide to read it. So number 4, The Exorcist, written by William Peter Blatty. Coming in at number 3 is going to be another true crime book, but a different style of true crime. This one is Ghost in the Wires, written by Kevin D. Mitnick. So apparently Mitnick is like this super famous hacker, which I'd never heard of him at all before I read this book, but I know nothing of the hacking scene. Like, what I know about hacking, I learned from Hackers, which is a fantastic movie, which is not realistic at all, I'm sure, but it was a great movie nonetheless. But that's it. And so I know nothing of that scene, but reading this book I thought was just so interesting because most of what he's doing is basically just social engineering, which is, basically trying to exploit people, the kindness of people, really, get them to do things they're not typically supposed to do because you have this, newfound relationship with them. And he is just like beyond expert level at doing this. He is a computer hacker. He, exploits the phone companies a lot. That's his big main thing, which he was starting in, I want to say like the early to mid 80s. And so that was, it just makes sense that was his first kind of big thing because they were a large part of the community at that point. And so from there, he obviously, goes on to do bigger and better things or worse things, depending on your view. But he is at one point, really wanted by the FBI, and they end up like trying to track him down because of the exploits that he manages. And so what's most interesting about Mitnick is that he never once used any of his hacks for financial gain ever. He didn't like exploit or leak data or anything like that. He just did it to see if he could do it. And it turns out he could. And he was like the best of the best at it. And so, this story, he's not exactly like humble in this story, and I know that was a complaint of some of the reviewers as I was reading this, but excuse me. Sorry about that. My throat is just giving me fits tonight for whatever reason. But anyway, so some of the negative reviews were that, he's just a little bit cocky, things like that, which I never really got that at all. Yeah, he's not humble, but he's the best at what he does. Like, he doesn't have to exactly be humble about it. And I thought it really was about him, but it's more about like just how he did what he did. And I found that aspect of it just so interesting to learn about, because I, again, knew nothing going into this. Like, and I still, like, I can't hack anything, you know? It's really, though, what his hacking is. When you see a movie like Hackers, you know, you think they're all just on their computers and it's all about like what they get done on the computer, when in reality it's they do that computer thing, but then they have to actually have somebody, some human, help them on the next steps. And that's where he just is amazing at having conversations, at, impersonating people, learning things about, every aspect of a company, and then using that to exploit to get what he is looking at to get. And so just his story, I thought, was just awesome to read about. And this is another one that really read like a thriller as opposed to a true crime book, because you are, the FBI is chasing him for the majority of this book. And it's, what's going to happen? I had no idea because I don't know his story. Obviously, if you know his story, you'll know what happens. But for someone who didn't know, it really read as a thriller. And I didn't want to stop this one. Like, I just kept wanting to be in a place where I could listen to this book, because I did this one thanks to Audible as well. It's just, it's a fascinating read that I am so glad I ended up like randomly buying in a 2-for-1 credit sale, I think it was, just because the reviews were relatively positive. And I loved this one. I think this was one of my 5-star reads this year. I think the top 5 are pretty much all 5-star reads for me. So loved this one. And even if it's not typically something that you'd be interested in, like myself, I really think you should give it a shot, because you might get as much out of it as I did. So Ghost in the Wires, written by Kevin D. Mitnick, comes in at number 3. Number 2 on my list is one where if you read it last year, it's probably on your list, because this is just a fantastic book. This is Project Hail Mary, written by Andy Weir. So I'll be honest with you, The Martian I thought was quite overrated as a book. I actually liked the movie more than I liked the book, but I did like Weir's writing style. I like the humor that he found in the book. It's just, I feel like the way it was written, again, you lose some of that tension about what's going to happen at the end of this. And so that part was a little bit disappointing to me, and some other aspects of it as well, of course. But for my money, Project Hail Mary is just infinitely better than anything he did in The Martian. So in Project Hail Mary, we are following what ends up being a high school teacher as he is in outer space. He wakes up, he has amnesia, can't remember why he's there or what's going on, and slowly that comes back to him. He does wake up with a couple people around him that they've passed away, and he doesn't remember exactly who they are at the start. And so we're basically trying to follow the story of him getting his memory back, figuring out what's going on, why he's out in space on this spacecraft, and what needs to happen next. But it is so much more than that, because there is eventually like another spacecraft that shows up, and I don't want to say anything more than that because I don't want to spoil it for you, because it's just special when you find out what's going on here. And this book is just, it is scientific, like this is something that Weir does really well, and he did it well with The Martian, is that he makes the complicated accessible. And I think that's so important, because I'm not a scientific guy at all. That's not what that's not what I'm good at. And so I can't even speak well, let alone do science. And so what he does is, though it feels like he's, speaking in this great lingo, it's still like you understand what he's talking about. So it makes you feel smarter while you're reading it, at least me, but I'm pretty simple-minded. But yeah, so, and then on top of that, this incredible humor that he brings in, I think, is so awesome with this. I was laughing out loud a lot during this book. And then the relationships he builds. So obviously the amnesia part of this, we do jump back in time a lot to see like how we got to where we are. But then that moment where you start moving forward, I think in the relationships he builds there are just... like the word magical just popped in my mind, which is a little cheesy, and so I don't know if that's the right term or not, but the way he does it is just, it's special. Like, that's the best way I can describe it. You wouldn't expect this relationship to be as strong as it is, but by the end of it, like, I was so emotionally invested in this story, and I had to know where things were going. This one is paced really well. The science in it is interesting. How we get to where we are is just awesome. Like, these flashbacks work really well here. And I think I like that style of his writing better than when I did with The Martian. This book was amazing, and if it was not for the first book on my list here, this would definitely be number one. But either way, it doesn't matter whether it's 1, 2, or 10. This is a must-read book. It's excellent. I will note that I did the audiobook on this, and they did say that there were some changes between the audiobook and the print book, but I wouldn't have noticed anything. Like, it was flawless, like seamless to me. So really well done audiobook as well. So I cannot recommend it enough. Check this book out if you are a fan of sci-fi. So number 2 is Andy Weir's Project Hail Mary. Okay, and here we are at number 1 on the list, and this might upset some people just because it's not a single book, but I cannot stress enough the impact that these books had on me this year. So number 1 on my list is Spy Family, written by Tatsuya Endo. So I read 6 volumes of Spy Family this year, and that's all that's out right now, unfortunately. And so I'm putting them all on the list, basically. Like, this series changed my reading habits to, if nothing else. It really is the reason that I wanted to continue reading manga after doing my manga reading vlog. I remember, I randomly picked it up. I don't even know why. And I put it maybe mid-tier as a book that I may or may not like, maybe even toward the bottom on my prediction portion of that video. And it ended up being my favorite thing that I read in my manga reading vlog. I ended up buying all of them throughout the rest of the year and reading them as quickly as I could. This is just an amazing story, and it's so touching and sweet and charming and funny and action-packed, and it is just everything I want out of a story. I am so much a character-first person, which Project Hail Mary, absolutely character first. That's what I love about reading, as I've said in the past, and with this, you just get that and so much more because you're reading, it's a manga style, so you get this amazing artwork to go along with it. So we are following this basically a makeshift family. So we have our main character, Twilight. He is a spy, and he is tasked with basically he has to get in contact with this certain individual. Well, this individual has a child that goes to this prestigious school, and so they decide that the best way to kind of get in his good graces is to create a family. And so he has to come up with this wife and this child that can eventually go to this school. Well, he comes across this assassin named Yor, and he doesn't know she's an assassin. And so they all have these different things going on, which I don't want to give anything away, but they have these things going on. And so they decide that they will be a married couple. They will act as a married couple. And then they adopt this little girl who happens to be a mind reader. And so it's just this makeshift family that all have special abilities or special powers, including a dog that comes in a later volume. And it's just the sweetest thing ever because that relationship that builds between the family, they grow stronger every volume. The action, how are they going to get out of the sticky situation that they're in? The ridiculous disguises that Twilight is able to pull off, which are just so unbelievable, but I'm still going with it because I love the story being told here. You get just some really fun fringe characters as well. Yor's brother is a lot of fun. He's playing a bigger role as the series goes on. There's this assistant basically that helps out who's really fun. I don't know, and I love the dog as they introduce the dog. I just everything about this family is so fun to read about, and I love the relationship growing stronger all the time. There are just some moments in here that are just so genuinely touching and sweet that it just it warms me to my core when I'm reading them because it's so universal. It's a universal love, and it's awesome. And so I just love these characters so much. And so that's why this really changed my reading habits, changed my reading life. Because without it, I don't know that I would have been as interested in continuing on with manga as I was at the end of that manga reading vlog that I did last year. So Spy Family is the best manga I've ever read, which obviously, I'm limited. I've read 33 volumes in my life, and so I'm very limited, but I've still yet to come across something that is as sincere and has touched me in such a way as Spy Family. And so for that reason, even though it is technically 6 different books, 6 different volumes, I don't care. You don't really care either. It's, you know, it doesn't matter. So this is Spy Family by Tetsuya Endo, and I cannot recommend it enough. If you likes manga, check it out. If you don't like manga, maybe this could be your breakthrough as well, because it is just excellent storytelling. And it doesn't matter what form excellent storytelling comes in, because it can still touch you in a similar way. So I'll leave it there. An awesome series, and definitely my favorite thing that I ended up reading last year. All right, so those were my top 10 book discoveries of 2021, and I'm looking at the time right here. Like, obviously, I'll cut this down a lot, but oh my goodness, this is probably going to be just as long, if not longer, than my top 10 film discoveries video, but whatever, is what it is. Hopefully, you can watch some and then come back to it if you need to. But either way, I want to hear from you guys. What were some excellent books that you read for the first time last year? Again, it doesn't matter what year they were released, just that you read them for the first time. I want to know some favorites, because that could give me some ideas for the future. So leave me some recommendations down in the comments below. And what did you think about my top 10? Is there anything on here that you think shouldn't be, or anything that you know I read that is missing from this list? Let me know about that as well. And I will mention, you can always follow me on Goodreads. I try to review everything I read on there as well, so you can get, you know, my thoughts on everything that I'm consuming in the world of books in 2022. But anyway, guys, that is it for now. So if you did enjoy this video, please give it a like down below. That really does help me out. And like I always say, I don't just talk books, I talk all things media, be it books, movies, video games, graphic novels, manga. If it's media related, I'm interested. And if you are too, you might consider subscribing. All right, guys, so that is going to do it for today. I just want to say thank you all so much for watching, and I want to encourage you to consume some media today. I'll catch you next time.